The courtroom was silent except for the soft humming of the translation devices. 12 different alien species sat behind a curved metal table, their eyes fixed on the single figure in the center of the room. Vex Thari looked nothing like the proud warrior who had landed on Earth 6 months ago. His blue skin had turned pale gray, and his forearms shook whenever he moved. The head judge, a tall creature with silver scales, spoke first. "State your name and rank for the record." "Vex Thari, former strike leader of the Keth Moran 47th Assault Division." His voice was barely a whisper. "You are the only survivor of the Earth invasion force. 2.3 million soldiers went to that planet. Only you returned. Explain." Vex Thari closed his large black eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with something the judges had never seen in a Keth Moran warrior before. "Fear. We thought we knew what war was," he said slowly. "We had conquered 847 worlds. We had studied human conflicts for 30 years through our long-range scanners. We watched them fight each other with simple guns and basic tactics. High Commander Zulkith called them angry children with sharp sticks." One of the judges leaned forward. "Your military records show a 99.7% chance of victory. What went wrong?" Vex Thari laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Everything. Everything went wrong because we never understood what humans really are." He stood up and walked to the large screen on the wall. With trembling fingers, he activated it. Images of Earth appeared. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds. "It looks peaceful, doesn't it? Beautiful, even. We thought it would be easy. High Commander Zulketh said it would be good training for our newer troops, a simple conquest to add to our empire." The images changed to show human cities. Tall buildings, busy streets, normal people going about their daily lives. "We spent months planning the invasion. Our war scholars studied every human military action from the past century. They watched their wars, their training, their weapons. The humans fought with metal bullets while we had energy weapons. They used wheeled vehicles while we had hovercraft. They communicated with radio waves while we had quantum links." Vex Thari touched the screen and new images appeared. These showed Keth Moran soldiers in their black armor, their energy weapons glowing blue in their hands. "We were superior in every way. Our soldiers were stronger, faster, and lived longer. Our weapons could destroy their tanks with single shots. Our ships could travel between stars while they were still learning to reach their own moon properly." "Then what happened?" another judge asked. "We made first contact exactly as planned. 3 large ships appeared over their major cities. We broadcast our surrender demand in their primitive languages. We expected them to give up immediately after seeing our power." The images on the screen changed again. Now they showed human soldiers in green uniforms carrying their simple metal weapons. Instead, they sent a small team to meet us. 12 humans led by someone called Commander Jiwon Kim. She was small, even for a human female. Maybe half the size of our smallest warrior. When she stepped out of her vehicle, some of our soldiers laughed. Vex Thari's voice became quieter. "That was the last time any of us laughed on that planet." What made this Commander Kim so dangerous? At first, nothing seemed special about her. She listened to our demands politely. She asked questions about our weapons and our ships like she was curious, not afraid. When we demonstrated our energy weapons by destroying a large rock, she just nodded and said, "Interesting." The alien survivor sat back down heavily. Then she did something we had never seen in 847 conquests. She smiled. Yes, and she said, "Thank you for the demonstration. Now let me show you something." She spoke into a small radio device. 3 seconds later, our forward scouting ship exploded. The judges looked at each other in confusion. "But you said their weapons were primitive." "They were. That's what made it so terrifying." Commander Kim's team had been watching us from hidden positions. While we were showing off our energy weapons, they were studying our ship with their simple telescopes and measuring devices. In less than an hour, they had figured out exactly where to hit us. Vex Thari activated the screen again. This time it showed a burning Keth Moran ship falling from the sky. The humans used their basic chemical explosives and metal projectiles. But they didn't just shoot randomly. They had calculated the exact angle and timing needed to hit our power core through a tiny gap in our armor that we didn't even know existed. How could they discover such a weakness so quickly? That's what we asked ourselves. High Commander Zulketh was furious. He demanded to know how primitive humans had found a flaw that our own engineers had missed. The answer came when we captured one of Kim's soldiers. Vex Thari paused, his breathing heavy. The human soldier was just a young female named Soyoung Han. Under questioning, she explained that their military had been preparing to fight superior alien forces for decades. They had written books about it, made movies about it, practiced for it. They were expecting you? Not us specifically. But they were expecting someone like us. They had imagined every possible way an advanced alien force might attack their world. They had planned counters for energy weapons, hover vehicles, energy shields, quantum communication, everything. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the translation devices seemed to hum more quietly. Commander Kim's team wasn't surprised by our technology because they had already thought of it years ago. Every weapon we brought, every tactic we used, every advantage we thought we had, they had already figured out how to beat it. That's impossible. That's what we thought too. But then we learned something even worse. Vexthari looked directly at the head judge. The team that destroyed our scouting ship and captured our soldiers? They weren't even their best warriors. Commander Kim told us they were just a rapid response unit, soldiers whose job was to buy time for the real military to arrive. The blue alien stood up again, his whole body shaking now. We thought we were fighting farmers and factory workers with old weapons. We thought their whole planet would surrender after we showed them our power. Instead, we discovered that every human on that world was a potential soldier, and they had all been training their entire lives for the day we would arrive. What happened next? Vexthari looked at the screen one more time. The image showed a human flag flying over the wreckage of Kethmoran vehicles. Next, we learned that humans don't just fight wars. They perfect them. The ocean waves crashed against the metal hull of the Kethmoran landing ship as it settled into the Pacific waters. Vexthari remembered standing on the deck that first day, breathing the strange air of Earth and feeling confident about the easy victory ahead. "Tell us about the first real battle," the silver-scaled judge said. Vexthari nodded slowly. After Commander Kim's team destroyed our scout ship, High Commander Zulketh was angry but not worried. He said it was just luck. He ordered a full assault on the human coastal city nearby. We had 5,000 warriors, 20 battle vehicles, and air support. The humans had maybe 300 soldiers. The alien survivor activated the display screen. It showed the coastline where the battle had taken place. The beaches were still black from weapon fire. We followed standard invasion protocol. First, we sent our hover tanks to clear the landing zone. Our energy weapons could destroy human buildings with single shots. Their concrete and steel melted like ice in fire. We expected the humans to run away screaming, but they didn't. No, they did something much worse. They watched us and took notes. Vexthari touched the screen and new images appeared. These showed human soldiers hiding behind destroyed buildings, but instead of looking afraid, they were studying the alien weapons with small devices. Captain Minho Park was in charge of the human defense. While his soldiers were dying around him, he was measuring the energy output of our weapons, timing our reload cycles, and calculating the range of our hover tanks. He treated the battle like a science experiment. The judges looked confused. Science experiment? Yes, every time we fired our weapons, his soldiers measured the energy signature. Every time our vehicles moved, they recorded the speed and turning radius. When our warriors advanced, they noted our tactical formations and communication patterns. Vexthari sat down and put his face in his four hands. Within 2 hours of fighting, Captain Park's team knew our weapons better than we did. How is that possible? Humans learn differently than we do. When Kethmoran warriors face new weapons, we rely on training and experience. When humans face new weapons, they immediately start thinking of ways to improve them or turn them against their enemies. The screen showed more images now. Human soldiers were carrying strange hybrid weapons that looked partly human and partly Kethmoran. By the end of the first day, they were using our own energy cells to power their primitive projectile weapons. Captain Park's engineers had figured out how to modify their metal bullets so they could punch through our energy shields, and your shields were supposed to stop all projectile weapons. They were designed to stop plasma bolts and energy beams. But humans don't just use energy weapons. They use kinetic weapons, pieces of metal moving very fast. Our shields couldn't handle the specific frequency of vibration created by their modified bullets. Vexthari stood up and began pacing. That's when we realized we weren't fighting a primitive species. We were fighting a species that specialized in taking advanced technology and making it work better. What about your superior numbers and training? Numbers meant nothing when humans started using our own tactics against us. Lieutenant Huna Lee was their medical officer, but she also became our worst nightmare. The screen changed to show a human female in green medical uniform. She looked small and harmless, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. Lieutenant Lee's job was to save human lives, and she was very good at it. But she was also very good at questioning captured Kethmoran soldiers while she treated their wounds. That's against Galactic War conventions. Humans don't follow Galactic War conventions because they never agreed to them. Lieutenant Lee would heal our injured warriors just enough to keep them alive, then ask them questions about our military structure, our weapon weaknesses, and our communication codes. Vexthari's voice became quieter. She was so skilled that our soldiers started to trust her. She would ease their pain and speak to them gently while she worked. Many of them told her things they would never tell an interrogator. What kind of things? Everything. How our command structure worked. Which officers were important and which were just for show. How our vehicles were maintained. Where our supplies came from. What our soldiers feared most. The alien survivor sat down again, looking exhausted. Within 3 days, Lieutenant Lee knew our army better than some of our own officers did. And she shared all of that information with Captain Park and Commander Kim. You mentioned fear. What did Kethmoran soldiers fear? Vexthari was quiet for a long moment. We feared being forgotten. In Kethmoran culture, a warrior's greatest honor is to be remembered after death. Lieutenant Lee figured this out and started using it against us. How? She would tell captured soldiers that their officers had already reported them as dead. That their families had already held funeral ceremonies. That no one was looking for them or expecting them to return home. The judges looked shocked. Even by their standards, this seemed cruel. But the worst part wasn't the lies. The worst part was that some of it was true. Our own command structure was so rigid that when soldiers went missing, they were often declared dead rather than missing. Lieutenant Lee had figured out this weakness in our system just by listening to our soldiers talk. What happened to these captured soldiers? Some of them broke completely and told her everything. Others became so angry at their own officers for abandoning them that they actually helped the humans plan attacks against Kethmoran positions. Vexthari activated the screen again. Now it showed human soldiers wearing pieces of Kethmoran armor and carrying alien weapons. By the end of the first week, it was hard to tell who was fighting for which side. Humans were using our equipment, our tactics, and even our own soldiers against us. Captain Park had turned a simple coastal battle into a training camp where humans learned to fight like us, but better. Better how? Kethmoran military doctrine is based on overwhelming force and superior technology. We attack directly with maximum power and expect quick victory, but humans had studied our tactics for years before we arrived. They knew exactly how we would attack and they were ready for it. So they were prepared, more than prepared. They were eager. Vexthari's voice became very quiet. I'll never forget the look in Captain Park's eyes when he realized our weapons were exactly what his engineering teams had predicted. He wasn't afraid or surprised. He was excited. Excited? Yes, like a human child opening a present. He immediately started giving orders to his teams about which weapons to capture first and which vehicles to disable instead of destroy. He wanted to study everything. The screen showed the final image from that first battle. Human soldiers were walking through a field of destroyed Kethmoran equipment, carefully examining each piece. We lost that battle not because the humans were stronger or had better weapons. We lost because they treated it like a learning experience. Every mistake we made, they remembered. Every weakness we showed, they exploited. Every advantage we had, they figured out how to take away. Vexthari looked directly at the judges, and that was just the first day. They had 88 more days to get better at killing us. The city of New Sol stretched out before the Kethmoran forces like a maze of steel and glass. Vexthari remembered thinking it would be easy to conquer. Cities were always easy because the defenders had to protect the civilians inside. After our losses at the coast, High Commander Zulketh decided to try siege tactics. Vexthari told the tribunal, "We surrounded the human city and demanded surrender. We had done this successfully on 400 worlds." The screen showed images of the massive Kethmoran army surrounding New Sol. Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of vehicles, and dozens of flying ships created a perfect circle around the city. Standard siege protocol is simple, Vexthari continued. Cut off food and power, threaten the civilians, and wait for the military to surrender to save innocent lives. It usually takes 3 to 5 days. How long did New Sol hold out? They never held out. They attacked us, the judges looked confused. Attacked? During a siege, the defenders should stay inside the city. That's what we thought too. But on the second night, something happened that we had never seen before. Bexthari touched the screen and new images appeared. These showed massive explosions and collapsing buildings. Sergeant Do-Hyun Choi was in charge of the Human Engineering Corps. While we were setting up our siege lines, he was doing something completely different. He was turning the entire city into a weapon. How do you turn a city into a weapon? By making it fight back. Bexthari stood up and pointed at the screen. Look at these buildings. See how they fell? That's not random destruction. Every collapse was carefully planned to create obstacles for our vehicles and funnel our troops into specific areas. The images showed roads blocked by fallen concrete, bridges destroyed at exact points, and tunnels that had been collapsed to redirect underground movement. Sergeant Choi had spent weeks before our arrival, placing explosive charges in key structural points throughout the city. When we surrounded them, he started bringing down buildings in a pattern that created a new battlefield, designed to help humans and hurt us. But what about the civilians? Surely the humans wouldn't destroy their own city with people inside. Bexthari laughed bitterly. That's what we thought. That's what any civilized species would think. But 3 days before we arrived, the entire civilian population had already left. All of them. Every single non-military person. Men, women, children, elderly. They all evacuated to underground shelters outside the city. The humans had been planning this for months. They turned their own city into a trap and used their people as bait to make us think they were vulnerable. The screen showed new images now. Instead of frightened civilians, the city streets were filled with soldiers in regular clothes, carrying hidden weapons and moving through secret passages. The people we thought were helpless civilians were actually reserve soldiers, shop owners who knew every back alley, construction workers who had helped build the tunnels, teachers who had memorized every building layout. When we entered the city expecting to find scared families, we found an army that knew the terrain better than we knew our own ships. How many soldiers were really in the city? We estimated 3,000 military personnel based on our observations. The real number was over 50,000. Every adult human in that city was trained for combat. Their children had been practicing with weapons since they could walk. Their elderly had been making explosives in their basements. Bexthari sat down heavily. We walked into a city where every person was an enemy and every building was a trap. Tell us about Private So Young-han. The alien survivor's face turned even paler. She was the worst of all of them, and she was barely an adult by human standards. The screen showed a young human female who looked harmless and innocent. She had a round face and smiled in the photograph. Private Han was assigned to captured vehicle analysis. Her job was to study our hover tanks and flying machines to learn how they worked. We thought she was just a mechanic. What was she really? She was an engineer, a pilot, a weapons expert, and a tactical genius all combined into one terrifying package. Within 2 days of capturing her first Kethmaran hover tank, she was driving it better than our own operators. The images changed to show human soldiers operating alien vehicles, but these machines looked different, modified and improved. Private Han didn't just learn to use our equipment. She made it better. She removed safety features that limited speed and power. She added human weapons that increased firepower. She changed the control systems to work better for human reflexes. That should be impossible. Our vehicles are designed specifically for Kethmaran physiology. Private Han didn't care about impossible. She studied our soldiers' body movements and reaction times, then modified the controls to work even better for humans. Within a week, human-operated Kethmaran vehicles were outperforming the original versions. Bexthari activated new images on the screen. These showed hybrid vehicles that were part human and part alien technology. But the real nightmare was when she started teaching other humans what she had learned, knowledge that took our engineers years to develop. She passed on to human mechanics in hours. Soon we were fighting our own vehicles operated by enemies who understood them better than we did. What about your air support? Gone by the second week. Sergeant Choi's demolition teams had figured out how to use our own energy weapons against our flying ships. They would capture a hover tank, remove its main gun, and mount it on top of human buildings. The screen showed tall buildings with alien weapons attached to their roofs, all pointed toward the sky. Our pilots expected to fight other aircraft, not ground-based energy weapons with unlimited power supplies. When they flew over the city, they were shot down by their own technology operated by humans who had never seen aircraft combat before but learned it in days. How were the humans learning so quickly? That's what made them truly terrifying. Every Kethmoran species learns through long training and careful instruction. Humans learn by doing dangerous things until they figure out how to do them right. Vexithari stood up and began pacing again. Private Han would capture a vehicle she had never seen before, climb inside and start pressing buttons to see what happened. If she crashed it, she would study the wreckage to understand why. If she didn't crash it, she would push it harder until she found its limits. That seems reckless. It was reckless. But it was also incredibly effective. While our pilots spent years learning to fly safely, humans learned to fly dangerously in days, and dangerous flying turned out to be much more useful in combat. The screen showed the final images from New Sol. The city was destroyed, but Kethmoran vehicles burned in the streets while humans walked among the wreckage, salvaging parts and taking notes. We lost the siege not because we couldn't take the city, but because taking the city made us weaker. Every day we spent fighting in those streets, the humans learned more about our weapons, our tactics, and our weaknesses. They turned our own siege into a training program for their soldiers. How many Kethmoran casualties? In New Sol, 14,000 soldiers dead, 300 vehicles destroyed, and 47 aircraft shot down. The humans lost maybe 8,000, but they gained knowledge worth more than 1,000,000 warriors. Vexithari looked at the judges with haunted eyes. When we finally retreated from that city, we weren't the same army that had surrounded it. We were a broken force running from an enemy that had learned to fight like us, but without any of the rules that held us back. What rules? Rules about civilian safety, about preserving infrastructure, about fighting honorably. Humans don't have those rules. They fight to win, and they don't care what they have to destroy to do it, including themselves. The black emptiness of space had always been the Kethmoran Empire's greatest advantage. Their ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything most species could build. But as Vexithari sat before the tribunal, he remembered how that advantage had become their greatest weakness. After losing New Sol, Fleetmaster Cordan decided to focus on space combat, Vexithari said. He pulled back our ground forces and committed everything to orbital superiority. Humans couldn't possibly match our ships. The screen showed images of the massive Kethmoran fleet hanging in space above Earth. Hundreds of warships, each one bigger than the largest human spacecraft. Our ships were designed for civilized warfare between advanced species, energy shields, long-range plasma weapons, and quantum targeting systems. We expected to fight other ships in honorable combat at safe distances. What did the humans do instead? They flew their ships directly into ours. The judges looked shocked. Direct collision? That's suicide. That's what we thought too. The first time it happened, we assumed it was an accident. A human ship lost control and crashed into one of our cruisers. Both ships were destroyed, but we had hundreds more. Vexithari touched the screen and new images appeared. These showed human spacecraft that looked different from normal designs. Reinforced hulls, extra engines, and minimal life support systems. Then it happened again. And again. We realized that humans were deliberately building ships designed to ram into our vessels. Captain Minho Park had invented something he called guided missile ships, spacecraft flown by human pilots whose only job was to crash into us as hard as possible. But the pilots would die. Sometimes. But humans had also invented something else, last-second evacuation pods. Their pilots would fly these missile ships at maximum speed toward our vessels, then eject in tiny escape pods just before impact. The screen showed the terrifying sight of human ships accelerating toward Kethmoran vessels, while small pods shot out behind them. Our weapons were designed to destroy large targets at long range. We couldn't hit the tiny escape pods, and by the time we destroyed the incoming ship, it was too close to matter. The explosion would still damage our vessel. Surely your shields could stop such primitive attacks. Vexithari made a sound that might have been laughter. Our energy shields were perfect for stopping energy weapons. But humans weren't using energy weapons. They were using mass and velocity, basic physics that no shield could deflect. What about your superior numbers? Numbers meant nothing when humans started hunting us like animals. The alien survivor's voice became quieter. Commander Jiwon Kim had studied our ship movements and found patterns in how we traveled through space. The screen displayed tactical maps showing Kethmoran fleet movements over several weeks. Red lines showed predictable paths between planets and orbital positions. Kethmoran ships follow standard patrol routes for efficiency and safety. We stay in formation, communicate regularly, and avoid dangerous areas of space. It's logical and civilized. And the humans? Humans don't care about logical or civilized. They found our patrol routes and started waiting for us like predators. New images appeared on the screen. These showed human ships hiding in asteroid fields, behind moons, and even inside the tail of a comet. Captain Park's space forces used tactics that no civilized species would consider. They would hide for days in radiation zones that would kill most life forms, just to ambush a single Catamaran ship. They learned to mask their energy signatures by coating their hulls with metals from destroyed asteroids. How could they survive in such dangerous areas? They modified their ships the same way Private Han had modified our ground vehicles. They removed safety systems, life support redundancies, and crew comfort features. Their ships became barely livable metal cans that could hide anywhere and survive anything. Vexthari stood up and pointed at new images on the screen. These showed human crews wearing thick radiation suits inside their own spacecraft. Human crews would spend weeks in those modified ships, breathing recycled air and eating food paste, just for the chance to destroy one of our vessels. They turned space warfare into a hunting expedition where we were the prey. But you still had superior technology. For a while. But then humans started capturing our ships. The screen showed something that made several judges gasp. Human beings wearing Catamaran spacesuits and operating alien spacecraft. The first boarding action happened when a human missile ship missed its target. Instead of destroying our cruiser, it crashed into the docking bay. The human pilot survived and found himself inside our ship. One human against an entire ship's crew? His name was Sergeant Do-hyun Choi, the same demolitions expert from New Seoul. Instead of trying to escape, he began sabotaging our ship from the inside. He used his knowledge of explosives to disable our engines, our weapons, and our life support systems. Vexthari sat down heavily. Within 2 hours, Sergeant Choi had forced our entire crew to evacuate their own ship. Then he called for human reinforcements to come collect his prize. How did reinforcements arrive so quickly? Because Commander Kim's forces had been planning boarding operations for weeks. They had teams of humans waiting in hidden ships ready to capture any vessel that became disabled. The screen showed more images of human boarding parties moving through Catamaran ships. They wore captured alien equipment and carried hybrid weapons. Human boarding parties were nothing like civilized space combat. They didn't follow standard assault protocols or try to capture ships intact. They moved through our vessels like a virus, destroying everything that resisted and studying everything that didn't. What did they do with captured ships? They made them better. Vexthari's voice was filled with bitter admiration. Within days, human engineers had stripped away every safety feature, every comfort system, and every regulation that limited our ship's performance. New images showed hybrid vessels that barely looked like the original Catamaran designs. Human modifications had turned elegant cruisers into brutal war machines. Private So Young-han was brought up to the orbital stations to work on captured ships. What she did to our spacecraft was even worse than what she had done to our ground vehicles. Worse how? She made them faster by removing armor from non-critical areas. She made them more maneuverable by stripping out crew quarters and cargo holds. She increased weapon power by connecting multiple energy cores in ways that our engineers said were impossible. Were they dangerous modifications? Incredibly dangerous. The modified ships had a 50% chance of exploding if pushed too hard. But humans didn't care about safety. They cared about winning. The screen showed the final space battle above, Earth. Human-operated Catamaran ships were fighting, alongside human missile ships against the remaining alien fleet. Fleetmaster Corden's final message, before his death, was a warning to the Empire. He said that humans had learned to fly our ships better than we could, and they were using our own technology to hunt down the rest of our fleet. What made human pilots so effective? They took risks that would kill any sane pilot. Our ships were designed with safety margins and automatic systems to prevent accidents. Human pilots disabled all of those systems and flew the ships at maximum performance. Vexthari looked at the judges with tired eyes. A Catamaran pilot flies a ship to 70% of its capacity to ensure safety and longevity. A human pilot flies the same ship at 120% of its capacity until either the enemy is dead or the ship explodes. And that strategy worked? It worked because humans don't think about individual battles. They think about winning the entire war. If destroying one enemy ship requires sacrificing a human ship and pilot, they consider it a good trade. The screen showed the wreckage of the final space battle. Destroyed ships from both sides floated among the stars, but more of them were Catamaran vessels. By the end of the space campaign, humans were operating a fleet that was half-captured alien ships and half-suicide missiles. They had turned space combat into something that no civilized species could fight against. Because it was too dangerous? Because it was too insane. Humans fight space battles the same way they fight ground battles. Like every engagement is a learning experience, and every loss is acceptable if it leads to knowledge. Vexthari looked at the final image on the screen. It showed a human ship flying past the wreckage of the Kethmaran fleet, its hull decorated with markings from dozens of successful battles. When our fleet was finally destroyed, the surviving humans didn't celebrate. They started planning their next mission, hunting down the rest of the Kethmaran Empire throughout the galaxy. The courtroom had grown colder as Vexthari's testimony continued. The judges shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they listened to descriptions of human warfare that challenged everything they thought. They knew about civilized conflict. You've described human tactics and technology, the silver-scaled judge said. But what made them so psychologically devastating to your forces? Vexthari closed his eyes and was quiet for a long moment. When he opened them again, they held a pain that went deeper than physical wounds. The worst part wasn't how humans fought. It was how they thought about fighting. The screen activated and showed images of human medical facilities. But these weren't normal hospitals. They were field surgery units set up in the middle of active battlefields. Lieutenant Huna, Lee's medical corps should have been our evidence that humans valued life and safety. Instead, they became proof that humans could normalize anything, no matter how horrible. Explain. Kethmaran soldiers are trained to fight until they are too injured to continue. Then they retreat for medical care. This is logical and preserves valuable warriors for future battles. The screen showed human soldiers with bandages and medical devices, but they were still carrying weapons and moving toward combat positions. Human soldiers fight until they die, but Lieutenant Lee found ways to keep them fighting even when they should be dead. That's medically impossible. Not for humans. Lieutenant Lee developed surgical techniques that could be performed during active combat. She would operate on wounded soldiers without anesthesia, while explosions happened around her. She invented ways to temporarily repair damage that would let a soldier fight for a few more hours. The images changed to show humans with obvious injuries continuing to fight, alongside healthy soldiers. I watched human soldiers fight with broken bones held together by metal rods. I saw them continue firing weapons with hands that had been partially amputated. Lieutenant Lee would patch them up just enough to keep fighting, knowing they would probably die anyway. Why would she do that? Because humans don't measure success by individual survival. They measure it by mission completion. Every extra hour a wounded soldier could fight was another hour for their unit to study our weaknesses and adapt their tactics. Vexthari stood up and began pacing again. But the real horror was that the soldiers wanted this. They would beg Lieutenant Lee to fix them quickly so they could get back to combat. They considered dying in medical care to be a waste of their death. The screen showed more disturbing images. Human soldiers who had clearly been modified with captured alien technology. By the final weeks of the war, Lieutenant Lee was using our own medical equipment to enhance human soldiers beyond their natural capabilities. She would implant Kethmaran strength amplifiers into human arms, or alien vision enhancers into human eyes. That's biological contamination. It could kill them. It did kill many of them. But the ones who survived became something worse than regular humans. They were humans with alien abilities and human psychology. The images showed soldiers who moved too fast, lifted too much weight, and saw too clearly to be natural humans. These enhanced soldiers could fight for days without rest, see our camouflaged positions from impossible distances, and physically overpower Kethmaran warriors who were naturally stronger. What about your command structure? Surely disrupting leadership would have stopped them. Vexthari laughed bitterly. That's what we tried. Sergeant Doyun Choi's demolition teams made it their specialty to eliminate human officers and communication centers. Did it work? It made things worse. Much worse. The screen showed battlefield communications between human units, but instead of the rigid hierarchy expected in military organizations, it showed something chaotic and terrifying. When we killed human officers, their soldiers didn't become confused or paralyzed like normal armies. They immediately promoted new leaders from their own ranks and continued fighting. That's standard military procedure. Not like this. Human soldiers would promote themselves in the middle of combat. A regular soldier would see their sergeant die, declare themselves the new sergeant, and start giving orders to their squad. The images showed humans wearing insignia that had been torn from dead officers and pinned to their own uniforms. Private Soyoung. Han became a lieutenant when her original lieutenant died. Then she became a captain when her captain died. By the end of the war, she was giving orders to soldiers who had been her superiors 6 months earlier. How could such a chaotic system work? Because humans don't need formal rank structure to organize themselves. They automatically form new hierarchies based on competence and survival. The soldiers who lived longest and killed most efficiently became the new leaders. Vexathari sat down and activated new images. These showed human battle formations that looked nothing like standard military organization. Captain Minho Park's tactical innovations became even more deadly as the war continued. He stopped thinking like a military commander and started thinking like a scientist conducting experiments. What kind of experiments? Every battle became a test of new weapons, new tactics, and new ways to use captured alien equipment. Park would divide his forces into small groups and have each group try different approaches to the same problem. The screen showed multiple human squads attacking the same Kethmore in position using completely different tactics. Group 1 would attack directly with overwhelming firepower. Group 2 would try stealth infiltration. Group 3 would use captured alien weapons. Group 4 would attempt psychological warfare. Park would watch all of these approaches and see which one worked best. That seems inefficient. It was incredibly efficient because humans learn from failure as much as success. The groups that failed would study their mistakes and try again with improved tactics. The groups that succeeded would teach their methods to other units. The images changed to show human soldiers teaching each other in the middle of combat zones. Within hours of discovering a successful tactic, every human unit on the planet would know about it and be practicing variations. They turned the entire war into a learning laboratory where every soldier was both student and teacher. What about morale? Surely constant casualties would break their will to fight. Vexathari was quiet for a long moment. That's what we never understood about human psychology. Casualties made them fight harder, not weaker. How is that possible? Because humans don't see individual deaths as failures. They see them as investments in victory. Every soldier who died fighting us was studying our tactics until their last breath. Their final radio transmissions weren't calls for help. They were tactical reports about our weaknesses. The screen showed the transcripts of final messages from dying human soldiers. Instead of personal farewells, they contained detailed information about alien weapon capabilities and suggested countermeasures. Human soldiers would use their own deaths as weapons against us. A dying soldier would trigger explosives that had been placed on their own body, or would give false information while pretending to surrender. That's barbaric. That's human. They turned everything into a potential weapon, including their own mortality. Death became just another tactic in their arsenal. Vexathari looked directly at the judges. By the final month of the war, we weren't fighting humans anymore. We were fighting a species that had adapted to warfare so completely that they had become something new. What do you mean? I mean that the humans who survived the war were not the same species that had started it. They had evolved in real time into something designed specifically to kill Kethmoran soldiers. The screen showed the final images from Earth, human soldiers who looked different from the early pictures. They moved differently, fought differently, and thought differently. Private Han, Lieutenant Lee, Captain Park, Commander Kim. By the end, they weren't just human soldiers anymore. They were the first members of a new subspecies that had learned to make war into an art form. And what happened to your forces? We broke. Not just militarily, but psychologically. Kethmoran soldiers are trained to fight enemies, not to be studied by them. When we realized that humans were using us as test subjects for their experiments in violence, many of our warriors simply stopped fighting. Vexathari stood up one final time. The last message from High Commander Zulketh before his death was a single word: run.